I've got some clay wedged up already. I'm going to put it down in the center of the wheel so that it's stuck real well. When I start spinning, it won't go flying. And I'm going to get it stuck onto the wheel head, lean over it a little bit to get it pushed down on there before I add any water. And then I can add the water because I want both my hands to be very wet when I start to throw. There's several ways to center. One of the ways is I'm leaning my shoulders over the clay, and I'm pushing down with this part, the flat part of my hand, pushing down and in. And then after I've pushed down and in a little bit to get it stuck onto there, then I'll change my position and I'll start working with this part of my hand and push in those two sides. Slowly bring my hands up. When I get to the top, let up my pressure. I'll add water anytime I stick, and I'm throwing with tap water, which is not as nice as slip. The slip allows the clay, or the throwing water, the slip, to slide over the surface of the clay. Regular tap water absorbs into the clay a little faster, but I didn't have any prepared. I'm going to use the the wooden rib to cut off some of that excess clay, so that my hand isn't sort of bouncing around on the bottom. What I've done now is called coning up, when I bring it to a tall cone shape like this, and that helps me wedge the clay and get it prepared. Now I'm going to change my hand position and use the palm of both hands, the top one, my left hand pushing down on the wheel, on the clay, excuse me, and my right hand acting as a brace. Add water when I start to stick. Now as I get down this low, my right hand is doing a lot of the work. My top hand has pushed down, but my right hand is pushing in from the side. And together they're compressing that clay and making it flat across the top and straight up and down the sides. This is the step that, the centering here, is the step that really takes the most getting used to for a new thrower. Now that I've got it centered, I'm going to start to drill my hole. First I position my fingers, make sure they're centered, and then slowly I start to push my fingers straight down into the clay. I push until I'm making a bowl, so until I'm about half an inch or a quarter of an inch from the floor. One of the ways you can check is you can take your needle tool, push it down until it touches the wheel head, and the clay that's in the floor there is holding it up. Then put your finger in until it touches the clay and pull them out together. So I've left myself just about a quarter of an inch. Probably a beginner should leave themselves a little bit more, and more if you plan to have a thicker floor. Trim more of a foot. So now I'm bringing the length of my fingers towards my palm. That's called opening out the floor, and that's actually a pretty quick step. I've got some water sitting in the inside of my bowl, so I'm going to take that out because water absorbing into the floor can cause cracks later on, and we don't want that. I'm compressing my rim. It looks like I got some sort of a bump there, which is either an unevenness in the clay or an air pocket, and I'll worry about that in a little bit. Now I'm going to bring I'm going to do what's called pulling up the wall. So I'm going to use my fingertips across from each other, and I'm going to push them together and bring them slowly up. I'm going to start at the very bottom, and I'm pushing those two fingers together using a sponge on the outside. Now I'm going to compress my rim. I can either squeeze those two fingers and push down on the top, or I can fold my chamois over on that top there. And I've got quite a bit of an unevenness there. I'm going to try to pull one more time. I'm using some old clay that hasn't really been pugged, so it's not in the best of shape. Let me get the water out of my floor here. As I pull, a little bit more pressure on the inside causes this bowl to get a little bit wider. Right now, before I get too far, I'm going to take care of that bump. You see there's that bump and kind of a rip over here. I'm going to use my needle tool. I'm going to hold it parallel to the wheel head and cut through the clay. I'm bringing it slowly across, let it do a full revolution, and then I'll take that extra clay off. Compress my rim. I'm going to fold my sponge over that rim, and I can still make a smaller bowl with what I've got here. In pulling up the wall, I use those two fingers or a sponge and a finger across from each other and pull them up. But I've got a lot of clay down here because it's a bowl, and that's where it tends to collect. So I'm going to really grab that clay at the bottom. And my inside hand is just going to come along for the ride. It's just hanging out right now, not really pushing. Now when they get next to each other, I can bring them both up together. And I've brought some of that clay that was hiding down there on the wheel head, down below my bowl itself, that would have just been cut off. And now I'm going to be able to use that in the body of my bowl here. So compressing the rim, each time I do a pull, I compress that rim. I get my water out of my floor, and I'm also going to use a rib on my interior here. I'm going to use the curved part of this rib, and I'm going to push it against the floor of my bowl here. That's going to compress my floor and make it stronger. It's also going to allow me to control that curve. So instead of being kind of bumpy, it's a nice even curve. I'm going to find my chamois here, and I'm going to fold this chamois over. Now I don't want to push on that rim, particularly on a thin bowl. That rim is going to start to get weak and collapse. So I'm actually going to fold this over and drag my thumbs on the side of that wall. And that compresses that rim, makes it look nice, and it also makes it a little bit stronger. Last thing I do before I take it off the wheel is I'm going to use my wooden knife. The blade of the knife is going to come in here. Oops. And I'm going to let it follow that same curve all the way to the bottom. One of the things people tend to do is as they come down, instead of coming down at a regular angle, they jump over to the side, not as dramatically as that, and they tend to cut that off. It's important that you follow that angle. It's a little scary when you first do it because you're cutting away a lot of your clay, but